There we go. Hello again, everybody. This is Derek, and I am coming back at you with another Wargaming and miniature video. And in today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up, or at least I'm going to attempt to finish up the Freeman's Farm miniatures. Well, they're all basically painted. Now I'm just basing them up. So, give me a moment while I touch this guy. I'm going to put 6 drops fairly even on the base, about every 10 millimeters apart, something like that. Perfecto mundo. And then what I'm going to do now is just randomly, well, not exactly randomly, but especially with these two, because that's, never mind. With this one, I'm just going to randomly put figures. Now, what I like to do is I line them up with my cutting board, because I've got 10 millimeter squares. And I put the figure on the lines of the 10 millimeters. Forwards and backwards, I push them back just a little bit. So you can imagine like 8 millimeters, something like that. Just to give more room in the front of the base. But left and right, I put on the line. So I use the cutting board kind of as a guide. Now, these guys here I'm putting together are the second mass uh, at Freeman's Farm, of course, the Saratoga campaign. The second mass, uh, as the year went on, later and later, they would have started to receive blue jackets or blue coats, but they initially started out in 76 and into 77 with primarily brown coats with red facings. And so I decided to paint them up with brown coats with red facings. Now, I do have a couple of figures. This one, the officer with blue coats. This is an NCO. And I like to put them in the front rank on the end. And then I'll do the same with the rest of the figures because they're all basically just infantry. And the brown coats were fairly common uniform color for the Continentals early in the war. And then gradually, as materials became more and more abundant or accessible, dyes and stuff like that, plus the states each had their own idea of what their army should be. And then gradually, all the states kind of came together on a universal uniform. And so, because originally it was like every state had their own color or their own uh, idea of what their uniform should look like. And so that was what kind of led to our army being considered ragtag, because like the British, all in red, you know, would have seen the Americans lined up on the other side of the field wearing who knows what, right? Every unit would have been different at the time. And they would have thought, what a bunch of rabble. They're not a well organized militia. They're just a bunch of pig farmers or whatever, you know? Well, first of all, they would have been right, but second of all, it wasn't their fault, you know? The different states had different ideas. Okay, that flag is like just right in the way of that dude, but that's okay. The way I folded the flag, it actually worked out pretty good. for that guy on the second row. Now, as I think it's 1970, no, I said 1779, there would have been regulations now. It would be more of a continental army. Uh, and blue would have been the adopted color. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, each state still retained its facing color. So, like, if Mass was red, then then they would have been blue with red facings after the new regulations. I think I'm correct. Of course, I think I'm correct. Okay. Well, we got them glued. They still need to dry, and that's going to take hours, right? So we're not really going to be able to watch that dry. But so what I want to do is kind of just sit back and relax and hang out with you guys this morning. I am planning on cooking some popcorn just for this morning. I know it's weird, right? And then I kind of want to talk about maybe talk about other topics. I don't know. We can talk. But give me a second. I'm going to go throw this in the microwave. We're going to pop it up. And then I'm going to eat it on camera. And you'll probably, I recommend you go get a snack and a drink so you're not jealous or whatever. But I had breakfast a couple hours ago, but for some reason, I still got this little craving for some popcorn. It's weird, right? I don't know. I'm weird. Give me a second. I'm going to pop this. It only takes a minute and a half or so. Actually, a minute and 10 seconds is what I put it in for. Now I thought I would do some terrain. We could do that on camera. I thought about doing some fields, cutting them up, but I'm decided against it. I don't want to do that because that's going to make a mess, and I'm not really prepared for that this morning. But what I was going to show is something like this. I'm going to do it differently because this is much larger. This is a 9-inch by 8-inch board, and I'm planning on doing something with a 6-inch board, 6-inch square. Okay, I just heard my popcorn finish. I've got these 6-inch boards. Okay, give me a second. I'll be right back. Let me grab my popcorn. Smells good. So I was thinking I could cut some 2-inch squares. Like, I could do 3-inch, but that would fill it up. Like that's a 3-inch by 3.5 inch. But if I did like a 2-inch, I could I could make something similar to this. And then like when you move your figures through it, you could just pull this up and move figs. This is actually a floor mat that I sprayed around the edges with brown, and then I actually flocked. I sprayed the top and I flocked it, but I really don't need to necessarily do that. Mm, that's good. And the board, I just put a little flock around the edge, and then I use clump foliage to give it kind of a overgrown kind of edge, not a fence or a hedge, but just like overgrown bushes. Now, I had originally made this board for Meg, which is a an ancient or medieval game. It's sword and shields, archery, cavalry, that kind of game. And it's in it's mass battle. So you're talking about a stand represents probably pretty close to a legion. 1,000 men or something like that. And they want um, the edge of the field or whatever to be clearly defined. Um, in Land of the Free, you also need to know the clearly defined, but really, I could just lay this on the table without the board underneath. And if that's the case, then I could technically just do a 6-inch square, um, or whatever I want for my fields. Yeah, I've got a floor mat. I've already cut it in half, basically just so that I could put it under a box over there where it will flatten it out. Hmm. But I don't know which direction I want to go. I think I want to make boards for smaller battles. Um, because Meg, this right here, is the size that you would use in a what they call a Maximus game, where my armies are not necessarily designed for Maximus. They're designed for Magna, which is the mid range, the 2/3. So the the terrain pieces should be 2/3. That's why a 6x6 would be perfect. And it would be perfect for my land of the free. And it would be perfect for my marshals and generals, the rules I'm writing for my Napoleonics. But again, I don't think I need a board underneath. I had a floor mat that I cut this off of that I originally had gotten from my 28 millimeter games of black powder. And I had cut it into various different polygonal, like different polygon shapes, so that it could, that you could have angled roads, or, it wouldn't be perfectly square or rectangle. And I think that was a mistake. I mean, it was a good idea, but I think just making them square would have been better. I would have been able to, um, they'd be able to fit into any scenario, any situation. But when you cut them to a specific size or a shape, like a triangle or something, it'll only fit in a triangle. And then you got to work it into place to find the right place to put it. And I think a square would just, or squares or rectangles. I mean, it's a rectangle. I think they would work as well. These are way too small for a field singularly. But this is 6 by 3.5, two of these side by side. And I think that would be a good field. And the edge of it is clearly defined. There's no like if, ands, or buts about how big that would be. Or where the figure would be. They'd either be on the edge or inside or whatever. Plus, I also need to make some S fences. I think they're called S fences, even though they're not S's. They're more like W's. They just go back and forth, zigzag. I need to make some fences. I've got a handful of those, but I need at least like 20 more. Well, maybe not. I have a bunch of straight fences. Split rail fence, I think is what they're called. I have a bunch of those. Um, 12 feet. I think I got 12 feet of those. Maybe more, actually. And I've got hedges out the wazoo that I made for my World War II gaming. And I got walls, but they're more like brick walls built. I need to make some like rough field type walls. But I don't need them. I just want them. And if I just lay this on the table without the board, I could always lay a fence right next to it, just for looks, and to enclose, the field. I don't think I'm going to make a bespoke Freeman's Farm table, with terrain boards. I've done that in the past with almost every battle I've done. I made a bespoke, like styrofoam tiles. I'll put grass on them and make hills and rivers and roads and just put them on these tiles. And that way I can just lay the tiles out and then everything will already be there. The wood outlines, the rivers will already be built into the tile. I don't think I want to do that. I think I just want to do a blanket and then lay rivers and roads on top of it. It won't look as good, but it'll be more versatile. I can do different battles. Now, I considered making geomorphic tiles. If you remember the old GeoHex, but I can make geomorphic square tiles and lay them out so that they connect, but you can, depending on how you place them on the table, you could make multiple different types of battlefields. And I can make them double-sided. I've got enough styrofoam pre-cut to 1 inch squares, 1 inch, no, 1 foot squares. And I've got enough to do probably a table and a half. Maybe, I don't think I got enough to do 2 tables, but I got enough to do a table and a half. So I can make a lot of varieties. Um, but I don't think I want to do that because I think that's going to limit me on how the battlefield is going to be set up. I mean, if I want to really focus on a specific battle, that's fine. But overall, I think I want a blanket with rivers and roads sitting on top of it. And then if I ever need to do any hills, I could always put styrofoam or a book or something like a pre-made hill. I can put it under the blanket so it'll all look like one field and not a field with a piece of styrofoam sitting on top of it. Have I have the Micro Armor GHQ, the Terrain Maker. I've got those hexes. Those are like 4 inch hexes. Uh, they're great for micro armor, but when it comes to and maybe 15 millimeter. That's what I'm wondering. If I could use those to make a terrain board for 15 millimeter, but I think they're too small for 15 millimeter. I almost wish I still had my GeoHex. I had like $2,000 worth. a bunch of boxes I had for many years, and then I got rid of it because it just took up too much space. Hmm. The roads, and that's like super easy. I get some stiff felt, cut the roads out, and then I plaster it and paint it and flock it, and I'm plastering the actual felt, and that actually turns out really good. But rivers, I have not done rivers like that. The Vallejo, AK, all those water effects, they're really flexible. So I think what I'm going to do is make some felt rivers and felt roads, and then plaster them, and then paint them, block them, put the water texture on them. But that's going to take a that's going to take a hot minute. Uh, okay, guys, I don't plan to stay on very much longer. Just letting you guys know. I've only been on for like 30 minutes. Okay, that's crazy. Um, but when these guys dry, I'm going to put the mud on them. And then once the mud dries, I'm going to put the grass on them. And then later tonight, I will do some close ups of these guys as part of my, what do you call it? American War of Independence Project update. Um, and if you guys stay stay tuned for tomorrow. I think tomorrow I'm going to bust out some of my felt and start cutting them into the proper shapes for roads and rivers, specifically for Freeman's Farm. See, I thought about this. Um, I could do a box with roads and rivers in them, like 1 inch. Keep saying 1 inch, but like 1 foot strips. Um, I could make my roads and rivers, or I could even do 2 foot strips if I've got the right size box. And then, but 1 inch, 1 foot would probably be best because of curves and whatever. Um, but once I got the table like laid out with just the felt, just pure felt. Once I got the felt all laid out on the table the way I want it, the rivers and the roads, what I could do is once they're finished, I could put them all in a box and I could label that box Freeman's Farm. And then I could put it somewhere. And then if I decide to do another battle, let's say Princeton, I can lay out the felt for Princeton. And once that's all built, the rivers and the roads and stuff like that, I can put that in a box. And that would take up way less space than making terrain boards uh, for two different battles. Because if you remember, about a year ago, I did a terrain board on this 4x6, 1-inch styrofoam squares. I keep saying 1 inch, but you know what I mean. 1 foot, 1 foot styrofoam squares. So that was 20. That's 24 squares, right? 6 foot by 4 foot. So that's 24 of these styrofoam squares, and I put them in a box. But that box winds up being a 1 foot by 1 foot by 24 inches. It actually winds up being a little bit more because of the because of the flock and the imperfections, because I did hills and things like that. So it wound up being a fairly sizable box, like a 3-foot box. And that's just for one battle. That's Quatre Bras, right? Which I have those right there under the table. So if I ever want to do Quatre Bras, I can pull out those boards and just lay them on the table, and everything will be fine. But I want to do more battles than just Quatre Bras, right? The same with Napoleonics. And if I did, how many Napoleonic battles are there? You know, just taking the big ones. You know, there's something like 30 very prominent battles. If I had 30 of those boxes, I would have no room in here. Man, they would just be stacked up from floor to ceiling. But if I did 30 12-inch by maybe 3 or 4-inch tall boxes, all of the battles would fit in the same box as that one Quatre Bras. That's what I'm thinking about doing. And what's good about the felt roads and rivers as the base, not wood, you know, not not having a road or a river on some kind of hard surface, but on the felt, it's very inexpensive, right? You could buy strips of felt, and I'm not talking about the soft craft felt that you find at Michael's or Hobby Lobby. That felt is like super soft. That's not what I'm talking about. Now I got something like in my sinus. I'm talking about stiff felt. Felt that when you hold it, it kind of holds its shape. Maybe not exactly, but and when it lays on the table, it lays flat. It doesn't shrink when you put the plaster on it. Because for one reason, the plaster it doesn't sit on the surface drawing the felt. You know, I don't know if you've worked with a lot of plaster for your terrain and stuff, but if you were to take this board and put plaster on the top of it, what you would notice is the board would the plaster would shrink when it dries. Oh, you can't see any of this. I'm using my hands and everything. I'm being all super okay. Yeah, the plastic plaster on the top would shrink up, and what that does when it dries, it shrinks and it causes the ends of your boards to kind of curl up. And now you've got this curled piece of terrain. With the felt, it's a little bit different. I found, and I'm over the moon when I found this out because I tried a variety of different materials, but because I've tried like rubber, I've tried because rubber would be flexible enough to maybe lay back down, but no, the plaster pulls it up, and then even though you lay it on the table, it still doesn't want to lay down. I've tried magnet sheets. Magnet sheets work okay. They actually work okay, but they when you have a long strip like a river, the they don't curl this way. They curl in on themselves on the sides, so your river banks are curled up. So that didn't work. That sucks. But when you put it on felt, um, it still will dry and it'll still shrink. But the big advantage is it works its way into the felt. So when it shrinks, it's just tightening it up. Everything's getting tight. It doesn't draw it up or down. It just kind of sits there. It's awesome. But that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take the felt. I'm gonna putty it and use a thin coat. You don't need to use a whole lot. But when you putty it or plaster it, uh, you make sure you work it into the fabric, right? Into the um, what do they call it? The fibers of the felt, and then what I'm planning on doing at that point is maybe putting a little bit of a bead along both sides. Maybe not because you don't really need it, but uh, I'm going to put the plaster, and then maybe I can draw out the inside of the plaster to make it a little shallower, a little thinner. Um, you don't want to get it too thin, or you'll get felt fibers sticking up through the plaster, and then it looks like it's fuzz. And so you want to have all that covered. But I can thin it out, and then later in, once everything's dried and I've painted it, I can put that water texture down the center. Yeah, it'll I think it'll look really good. And at this scale for a a miniature game, uh you don't need much more than just this wide for the bank, and then this wide for the river itself. Or you could put the river all the way up to the edge almost. Um, the advantage, I mean, the reasoning behind that is if it's a major river like the Mississippi or something like that, that's not going to be on the table, right? That would be on the edge of the table or something. But it's really only little creeks and fordable rivers that you would be crossing. It's not like the Arnhem Bridge. You're not trying to cross that with a Land of the Free or Freeman's Farm or okay, with American War of Independence or Napoleonics or even ancients. They're not crossing gigantic rivers. They're not crossing the Nile. So you just whenever there's only like streams and creeks and small rivers, you can make them fairly small. Because if you think about it, I think about this all the time. Ground scale is not the same as figure scale. The You're talking about muskets only shooting like 6 inches, something like that. Um, 6 inches compared to a 15 millimeter figure is only like 120 feet, something like that. Yeah, you can shoot a lot further than that. So, um, yeah, about 120 feet. You should be able to shoot a lot further than that. So, um, ground scale is usually around 25 yards per inch. So, 6 inches would be like 300 yards. Wait, 25 per inch? No, it wouldn't. 4 inches would be 100. So that's like 150 yards, 6 inches, which maybe is 50 yards per inch or whatever the ground scale is. But if you make your river an inch wide at that scale, you're saying that the river is 50 yards wide. And that's a little much, right? So you want to bring the width of the river down. You want it to be a little smaller to be in accordance with the ground scale, but you also want it to look cool against the figures for the figure scale. So, smaller streams for mass battle games is better. Now, if it's a skirmish game, man to man, yeah, a 4 inch or a 5 inch river would be cool because your figure height is probably closer to ground scale. It just depends on how you're playing. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, it's almost 10 o'clock. Well, it's 9:45, right? I haven't been streaming that long. It's a fairly short day because I'm waiting for dry time, and I'm not ready to do the fields. But I'll make a promise to you guys. Tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll work on laying out felt. We'll cut out felt for the roads and the rivers, and I'll start plastering. We'll start plastering. I already have a bunch of roads that I made for my World War II games. And yeah, a road is a road. You can use it, right? Um, the asphalt roads I can't use, but the dirt roads I can. And I only have a handful of those. But I need to make a whole bunch more dirt roads. Um, yeah. So we'll work on roads and rivers tomorrow. And tonight, I will uh, record that. I think I might even do a. Yeah, I might do the. I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to lay out all the British figures and all the Continental figures on the table, like I did when I did 28 millimeters about 10 years ago for British Grenadier, which is the game system that really got me into the American War of Independence. After a convention, uh, I went to Historicon '09. So 10. That was about 15 years ago. Dang, that I did those American War of Independence figures, and those were all in 28 millimeter. Mostly Old Glory, but there are a variety of other brands. Um, if if you look at those videos, they're done in a horrible resolution. I think 720 or something like that. And I had a different way of painting back then that I learned from a guy, um, and it worked It works really good. It makes the figure look really good. It just takes an incredible amount of time to do it that way. And I didn't, um, when you're trying to get an entire army on the table or whatever, I was able to do it. I painted everything you needed for British Grenadier. I don't remember if it was Freeman's Farm or if it was some Princeton or some other battle. It might have been Freeman's Farm. Mainly because it's one of the more um, not condensed. It's like a pretty structured battle, right? The it's like a division on both sides or something like that. It's pretty orderly, but it's also pretty small. Um, yeah, so I'll probably put all the units on the table, and I'll show you the entire collection after I do close-ups of these two units, and then that's the video. And then tomorrow morning, what we'll do is roads and rivers. We'll get that started. Um, Even if I have to putty and putty the roads and rivers, that takes a while to dry. So that's going to be sitting on the table for a day or so. Um, oh yeah, 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 yeah. Let me say this. What I also do, and this I'm going to do it tomorrow, so you'll see. But well, if we get that far, I lay out wax paper, right? So if any putty or paint or anything like that gets, uh, over paint or over putty or whatever, it'll be protected. My table will be protected by this wax paper. But partially what I'll do is I've got this wax paper laid out pretty long, like 4 to 6 feet on the table, right? And I've got my roads, my rivers all laid out. And when I putty them, I deliberately over putty. Like I'll putty over the road, not a whole lot, but just like I'll run the putty and I'll run it onto the edge of the felt and over the side of the felt onto the putty, onto the paper. So the putty will actually stick to the paper. Um, I mean, you can peel it off later, but it kind of sticks and it helps the roads and rivers. I don't know about rivers yet, I haven't done them, but it helps the roads lay perfectly flat. Because once it dries and you peel it off, you've got all this flash, I'll call it flash, along the edges, along the side, and all I got to do is take my hobby knife and go zap, zap, and they're back to square, ready to be painted. Now, I can then lay them back down, and then when I paint them, I can overpaint as well. But because of the wax paper. So it's just a wonderful way to hold everything down. Uh, and the reason why you'd want to do that is it this is one additional way to help it from curling. Um, but I found I don't need to worry about it curling. And then if you got hills or something, when you lay felt on the hill, it'll conform to the hill, and the putty that I use is very flexible, so it'll conform to the hill as well. Now I know that there are people out there that will mix paint in with their putty so that when and if they ever have to putty any terrain like a hill or a road or whatever, they don't have to later go back in afterwards and paint it because the putty is already brown or whatever. I think that's a really good idea, but believe it changes the properties of the putty, makes it crack, and yeah, I'm not sure about that. I guess if I'm using acrylic, it shouldn't crack. It's just a step that you can use, but you'd have to use a lot of paint for the putty to mix, because if you don't, it'll come out like light brown, maybe even, it won't be, it'll come out like this, which there's nothing wrong with this, but if you're wanting it to come out darker like this, then you'll have to use a ton of paint, more than what's in any of these bottles, more than what's in one of these bottles. You'd have to use maybe even more than that. So I find it easier just to uh, paint on top of uh, the putty once it's dry. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out. If you want, you can stay with me for another couple hours uh, on a different stream. I'm planning on playing a little bit of Skyrim. Um, I'm going to do a live stream of Skyrim for a couple hours. And then at 2 o'clock my time, which is what, about 4 hours from now? About 4 hours from now, there's a podcast I like to watch. I don't always watch it live. I watch it on the follow up, like afterwards, just while I'm painting or doing something. Um, it's called the Plastic Crack Podcast. They seem like they're a bunch of really cool dudes. They really share a lot of knowledge, and they also have biases. Like they like specific games, and they're unwilling to try other games. It's like they're very, very set in their ways. But on the other hand, they seem like they're a bunch of cool dudes, and there's nothing wrong with that. If they like a game, like me, if I like a specific game and I want to play it, that's what I want to play. But I will play other games. They'll play other games. But on their stream, they basically focus on specific games, and uh, almost all of them are Warlord games. Like one guy does Black Powder, one guy does Hail Caesar, another guy does Bolt Action. Um, they are all trying to get into Epic. Um, yeah, so it's like they they're kind of narrow-minded in that regard. But I hate to say it, but I really enjoy watching them. And that's it too. I recommend everybody check them out. um, a lot of people will submit like what miniatures they painted and stuff like that. So you get to see a lot of work that other people are doing, because they show that off every week. Wait, there might not be a plastic crack this week. I think they said maybe there's going to be a. Oh no. I think they said they're going to take a week break. But either way, if it comes on, I'll watch. If not, oh well, no big deal. And all right, yeah. Thank you guys for hanging out. And if you have any topics that you want me to discuss or talk about or share my thoughts, or you have any games that I play you want to know a little bit about, or any, I guess that's a topic, put it in the comments. Drop it in the comments and I'll read that, and then I'll consider talking about that the next time we go live. All right, guys, I'll catch you in the next one.